Hi, I'm Tom, and in this video, as well as a couple of other upcoming videos, I'll be showing you some of the quote-unquote cheap and easy ways that I've upgraded the level of detail on my battlefields. If you missed the Horus Heresy content on this channel, don't worry, it is coming. I got army expansions, I got a new army project that I'll slowly be starting to work on shortly, and I got some battle reports coming up. And in this video, I'll be continuing my little journey of upgrading my battlefields to a higher level of detail, and also adding a little bit of cinematic functionality, all with very cheap and readily available materials. So you can hopefully do this too if you're bored a night or two during the week. In this one, I'm making some blast craters that you can either pre-place on the battlefield or use to make the battlefield a little bit more cinematic when a blast or artillery weapon has made an impact, and you can place that where it's hit, sort of to tell a story during your battles. This is what I intend to do during my future battle reports. Although it won't count as difficult terrain, it'll be purely cinematic. Anyway, let's go on to how to craft this. It's actually really simple. In essence, you only really need 3 materials. Some cardboard, some wine corks, some wood/PVA glue, whatever you choose to call it, and of course some paints. There are a few extra things that I do, but it's totally optional and depending on your needs. So what I start off with is just cutting a shape that I want the crater to be. Then I take a standard wine cork, and if you don't have one yourself, just ask friends or family to save them whenever they have a bottle of wine, and it'll add up quickly. What I do here is basically just shave the sides of it, giving me these long strips that I will slowly turn into the main shape of the crater. And whatever debris and chunks fall off the wine cork, you can use those too. First step is really just to shave it down, sort of like what I do here. And if you get some weird shapes, you can get creative with that too in the next step. And here I'm sort of making a mock-up by just placing these strips along the circumference of the crater shape that I made. To make it feel a little bit more organic, I'm starting to make some dings and some cuts and ripping the cork. It's easy enough just to rip when it's this thin to give it some texture, and you just keep doing this. Honestly, you can make a couple of craters in half an hour if you want to. You can even do this while watching a show. Just watch your knife, of course. The cardboard I've used is just from any packaging. This is a little bit thicker cardboard with a plastic liner or something on one of the sides, as I think it'll be a little bit more sturdy, but you can use whatever you have at hand. And then the next step is really just to put down a ring of glue and place the pieces of the crater around it. I also take a bit of PVA on the side and water it down, just so I can get some glue into the nooks and crannies of the crater and the shapes that I put on there. A note on using PVA glue: as I was just going through and doing this, the PVA has a tendency to warp the cardboard as it dries. It might look a little bit extreme as it dries, but when it is dry, it will even out a little bit again. I hear some good advice that you can counteract this by first doing like a dummy layer of PVA on one side and having that dry. Then when you do it on the proper side, then there's no issue, or less issue. But I didn't do this time around, but it might help you if it's an issue. Like I said, it sort of returned back to normal after it was fully dry. I don't think it will be too big of an issue. I guess it depends on the cardboard and the PVA in question. Here I take some of the watered down PVA to try and make sort of a second layer or second ring on top of it, or just to get more glue onto contact surfaces between some of these pieces of crater material. It can be a little bit frustrating working with it because PVA doesn't grip that well in the beginning, so it is a little bit fragile while you work at it. And I will come back to the fragility of it and address it in this video, so don't worry if you feel like this sort of construction method is too flimsy for gameplay. I also make a little puddle of glue in the middle and sprinkle some of these shavings and offcuts in there as more crater material from the blast impact itself. You can see that it wants to spring up and start to bow a little bit because of the moisture and the glue, but don't worry about it. And you can see here that it's also a little bit fragile, as I was talking about. But let it dry and it's a whole different story. Don't worry about it. I'm making some more here. Same method, different shapes. For instance, there's an elongated shape, like a round impacted, skidded along and then exploded, or an energy weapon, or what have you. You can make different sizes and shapes of craters for your specific needs. Once it is dry, I am going through and removing sort of the lip of the crater shape, just because I want it to be generic and be able to put on almost any battlefield. You can leave this and texture it and put whatever material on it that your battlefield has. But I personally like the look of having no lip on it. So I just go through with a scissor and try to undercut it so you don't really see it from above. And if you see it, of course, we'll put some debris on it. Don't worry about it. I've previously made a couple of test pieces where I actually didn't have this lip, but it's a little less sturdy because I glue it all the way out to the edge. You can see some of them here. I actually forgot that I have another little blast marker. You'll see that appear later because I forgot I had it. So to address the fragility issue, if you could even say that there is an issue, I personally do a layer of Mod Podge on top of it and on the bottom, making sure to get into all the nooks and crannies just to make a tight and strong bond with everything. If you don't have this material, don't worry about it. You can just do some watered down PVA. It will have a slightly different texture to it, but in the end, I don't think there will be much of a difference, and you could just as easily do that. But I'm using Mod Podge as it is something that I have recently started using, and I love it, and it doesn't seem to alter the surface texture all that much, which is nice. I also go through and do this with the ones that I've already primed from my test pieces that I did off camera. But this is an optional step if you don't need to move your terrain for games, or don't play that rough, or don't feel like doing this step and just want to make more instead. So if one of them gets damaged, you can just replace it, then skip it. It will make painting easier though, especially when dry brushing. So there is that. The painting of the craters didn't go exactly to plan, so therefore I'm going to do two paintings of the craters. One like I would normally do, which is the simplest way that I know, and it still looks good and definitely reads as stone. And then I'll briefly go through what I ended up doing for the bulk of them. So what I would normally do, and if this is your first time, I would suggest following this, is to prime your terrain black. And then on top of that, I would do a heavy dry brush. Well, not even really a dry brush, sort of like a damp brush of a gray of your choice. If you pick something not too dark, not too light, I think that works fine if you're just going with one color of gray. If you have more, then do the darker one. Then after that's dried, then do the lighter one, and then so on and so forth. And then when that is dry, I'll just go through with a sand or beige and do an actual dry brush aimed at catching the edges and the texture of the stonework. Here I'm going to go on to the other way that I painted mine this time around. It's not because I didn't want to paint it in this style that I've just explained. It is because I ran out of black primer, so I ended up priming it gray, which is what I had, and doing sort of a mottled white prime on top of it, just to bring some variation. And since I didn't have the black undertones, I wanted to darken up the rocks, and I was going to do this with a wash, a homemade wash made up of some inks, some black and some brown in this case, some water, and a bit of matte medium to bind it all together. All materials that you can find fairly cheaply in any arts and crafts store, I would think. Or you can of course use your expensive hobby washes if you feel like it. You can also just really water down some cheap craft paint. Of course, quality will vary depending on which of these methods you use. I had the wash a little bit more brown than normally, which is not an issue, but it just tinted the whole thing a little bit, which is again fine, but for showing an easy demonstration, it wasn't that optimal. Hence the one demonstration with the black, gray, and sand color. Like I said, there are many other techniques. You can do leopard spotting, you can paint each rock sort of a different color. I'll let you figure that one out, what fits your style. Once this is all dry, I go through again with a dry brush of sand or beige or even white, but a little bit more lightly this time to catch all of the textures and raised bits of the cork. And then we move on to filling in the ground material around the craters. For my craters and my battlefields, I'm using this mixture that I made for another project, and I can't remember if I've showed it off on video. So what it is a mixture of different craft paints to match the color of the terrain and the bases of my miniatures, a bunch of fine sand that I got from a beach, I think, and then a little bit of PVA glue to make it a tight bond between all of the things. And I made a very big batch of this a while back. The spare material I put in some old paint pots, so I have some materials ready to go, and I also have a larger top of it if that wasn't enough. So just paint this into the crater and any lip that is showing, and also you can put this on top of the rocks because dirt would have been blasted on top of the rocks too. Depending on how fresh the crater is and depending on your style, you can also opt to do a black dry brush in the crater itself and around the sort of internal lip or rim of the crater to give it sort of a sooty, recently exploded look. I was perhaps a little bit too impatient with doing this black dry brush as the base material wasn't fully dry. Not to worry, if you follow along, you just let it dry first, of course. But in my case, I just ended up pouring a little bit more base material in there, as well as some black, and mixing it into it and letting it dry. Pardon me the unprofessional demonstration, but I also told you how to fix it if you run into the same thing. Here we are. I think it turned out pretty nice, especially for the amount of effort that I put in. You can either make your landscape more war-torn, or when a vehicle explodes or a blast template hits, you can leave it there to tell a story. I hope you found this interesting and it might be able to help you out in one of your creative projects or give your battlefield a little bit extra. If you're one of those that have watched all the way to the end, thank you very much. It means a lot to me. And if you're one of those lovely people that have chosen to subscribe or share your feelings about what it is that I've made, then that also means a lot to me. So thank you for that. I hope to see you in another video. I got another one of these terrain tips coming up soonish, and then I think we're back to some Horus Heresy content for a little bit. So thank you for watching, and until next time, cheers.